The drone has really become the king of the battlefield and has pushed back all other competing traditional systems. The West needs to realize that it's a game changer, and it has fundamentally changed the character of modern war. The operational and strategic level was kind of behind the drone revolution. I think that if Ukraine bet on drones large during the counteroffensive, it could have given it the advantage that they needed over the Russian army. Essentially, if you win in the air domain, but lose the near surface and the land domain, and arguably the marine domain, they lost the war. You adapt or you're destroyed.
Illya, thanks for joining us today.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
So we're going to be talking about a lot of interesting things today, and you have a very unique perspective as a former drone pilot turned author and also current and former advisor to Ukrainian MOD. Why don't you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
So essentially I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. So I was born in Kyiv and I moved to Canada when I was a teenager. And it just happened that when the war started, I was living in Kyiv. I was living a wonderful life. So I was CEO and owner of a small but successful tech company.
Uh-huh.
And also I lived in a nice apartment, rode a red Jaguar, and had a beautiful Ukrainian professional model as a fiance. So I was living a good life in Kyiv. And but I decided to sign up for military service as a volunteer in March 2022. So first I joined infantry, all volunteer unit. But later on, I was in the summer of 2022, I received training as a drone pilot and later a drone pilot instructor. And I performed missions on the front line during 2022 and 2023. Mm-hmm. Then I proceeded to work for the Ukrainian General Staff as a researcher and translator, and ended up as an advisor to senior members of the Ukrainian High Command, including Minister Fedorov and the commander of the National Guard of Ukraine, General Alexander Pivnenko. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I wrote a book about all this, which is called Rise of the Machines, Drone Warfare in the Russia-Ukraine War.
So talk to me about the early days of the war, right? I mean, CEO of an IT company, hops, you're on the front line as an infantry guy for a while. Like, was it just like throw as many bodies? Is this how the Ukrainians thought about throw as many bodies at the problem to stop the advance? And then from there adapt? Like, what were the early days of the war like for you?
Yeah, unfortunately, the Ukrainian government and the top military did not really did a good job for preparing for the invasion. I think they had this tunnel vision that that the Russians would only attempt to attack them in the Donbass. And so despite the military intelligence, especially coming from the United States and the United Kingdom, they did not make sufficient preparations for attacks from the north and the south, and that led to a quick overrun of the south and the Russians coming to the gates of Kyiv during the first few days. So it was really chaotic. So there were the Ukrainian government were handing out weapons to random people in the streets, which is not a very good security situation long term, and which created some friendly fire incidents because they did not know who the guys were getting the weapons. Because an army is not just random guys with guns. So this is just a gang or something like that. Our army is, first of all, organization and command and control. And so that was lacking in the first early hours. But the Ukrainian way of fighting a war is typically decentralized. So people just trying to find their own place within this organization, and they have lots of horizontal networks. And I think that the patriotic fever of the Ukrainians was the real thing that saved our nation, because the military itself would not be able to resist the might of the Russian army. But when the whole nation started to come out to defend against the invaders, this is when the tide turned. And of course, it was not easy in the early days, but it was not easy for the Russians too, because they did not expect to have the kind of fanatical resistance from the Ukrainians, and made a number of also operational mistakes and tactical mistakes. And so we were able to defend Kyiv and to fight back the invaders. They retreated from the Kiev region, and my unit was relocated further east to the Barvinkovo area to stop the attack of the Russian First Army, tank army, coming from the Izium area south to try to sever the link to the Donbass and to try to make a large cauldron there.
So then talk to me about the transition into drones. Right?
Yeah. So at that time, I was with I was invited to come to a special operations unit of the National Guard, and we were it was a unit made up of foreigners, so about 30 guys, the British, the Americans, we had a few Japanese, really all sorts of backgrounds, most of them ex-military guys and veterans, and we were tasked. We were getting ready for some special operations, and and there's an interview with the French press came. You can find it on YouTube. I describe it in my book. And we were visited by some Ukrainian drone pilots, and this was when I realized that the effect of the drones was much greater than of all those special operations guys who you normally see in the movies. And so I understood that early on that the drone is a game changer, that it's not just something transitionary and not just a poor man's Air Force, which was the mainstream idea of the military, actually. Because the Ukrainian generals did not take drones seriously. They had a couple of drone procurements, but of Leleka 100 drones and Bayraktar large UAS, but they did not truly put drones at the center of the war effort. And it was a bottom-up grassroots movement, and the drone revolution that happened in Ukraine was a convergence of some factors. So it was the technologies that basically the advent of the civilian quadcopter, of the DJI Mavic 3 class, and also the Ukrainian military was uniquely positioned because the Ukrainian soldier has a lot of freedom. Because in Western countries you get your standard gear and you work with this gear, but in Ukraine you have sometimes soldiers are poorly provisioned, and so they are augmented in their equipment by many NGOs in the country, and so that's how you can experiment with the technology. And so this convergence of tactical and social and organizational structures created this dronification of the army, you can say. And the Russians, although they had a good program with fixed wing UAS like Orlan 10 and similar machines, at the tactical level, the Ukrainians went ahead of the Russians at that time because the proliferation of the Mavic 3 really allowed the ISR that the Russian army didn't have. And so we had this early first mover advantage in the war. But the Russians then started mimicking us naturally, and these cycles of adaptation then occurred later on.
What's all right, so that was what, summer of 22 probably when you first got exposed to it?
Yes, I got my drone training at the Yasny Ochi drone school in the Dnipro region in the summer of 2022.
And then talk to us kind of about that next year and then the transition into the staff. Like what were you seeing that was like, pretty revolutionary in your minds?
So early on, the drones at the tactical level were primarily used for intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, artillery correction, and battle damage assessment purposes. So later on, they started adding bomb dropping capabilities, and we also experimented with this. There were small anti-infantry fragmentation grenades, 30 millimeter Vog 17 type, or the Western equivalence, which is a 40 millimeter fragmentation grenade. But the Mavic 3 really can't take a large payload, so typically it's like 200 grams. You can add more, but then the flight is not as stable. And the FPVs was the next innovation cycle which we can pinpoint, and it started in a large scale in 2023, and during the Ukrainian counteroffensive in 2023, the FPVs were already playing a major role, but the command the high command did not yet realize it. So the tactical level was leading, and the operational and strategic level was kind of behind the drone revolution.
Interesting.
And it was a big mistake. I think that if Ukraine bet on drones large during the counteroffensive, it could have greatly given it the advantage that they needed over the Russian army, because in conventional and traditional capabilities, if you look at the numbers of the correlation of forces, the Russians were really ahead of the Ukrainians despite the Western help. And so the only way that the Ukrainians could win would have a decisive advantage in some other form of capabilities, which is the drone.
Yeah.
And the drone has a lot of advantages. Coming back to the poor man's Air Force analogy, the drone has a lot of inherent advantages when it comes to, like in my book, I compare the drone to the tank as a revolutionary weapon of its time. So the tank typically has these three characteristics: armor plating, maneuverability, and firepower. And in a similar vein, I distinguish four characteristics of the drone that makes this weapon unique and give it an advantage on the battlefield. It's omnipresence. It provides a detailed view of the battlefield in real time and creates this battlefield transparency.
Yep.
It's discardability. So the drone, the modern drone systems are cheap and are discardable. So in a way that a conventional system like a tank or an artillery piece is not. So you can send a large number of a large fleet of drones, and if half of them are destroyed, and only a handful get through, but achieve the mission, it's still a success, which would not be with like conventional Air Force or army equipment. And third is mobility. You can quickly move drones from one part of the front line to another, and their logistical footprint and their signature on the battlefield is minimal. So if locating and then destroying a drone operator is much more difficult than locating traditional bulky military hardware. And the fourth characteristics is accurate direct fire. So drones can deliver precision strikes the moment you locate the target. So you don't have to call in air support.
There's no lag. Yeah.
There's no lag. And for artillery, you need a couple of rounds before it hits the target.
Yep, decided.
Yeah, and so with the drone, you can deliver accurate direct fires immediately on your target. And so these four characteristics have really created the so-called kill zone and have pushed back other weapon systems, competing weapon systems, away from it. So you don't see tanks near the front line, you don't see artillery pieces, and if you see them, they're not deployed the way they are supposed to be deployed, that is in battery formations, like 6 artillery pieces. They are concealed, and they have to move position quickly. And the same applies to infantry fighting vehicles and other assets. So the drone has really become the king of the battlefield, and has pushed back all other competing traditional systems. And I think that this is the West needs to realize that it's a game changer, and it has fundamentally changed the character of modern war.
So, what's interesting is, I think it was in the news about 30 days ago that a Ukrainian drone team brought a bunch of Baba Yagas to a NATO event and wiped them out in like the first day.
Yeah, this is the problem, that Ukraine and Russia, and maybe it also relates to Russia's allies, that we've had 4 years of adaptation and fast innovation cycles in order to prepare the militaries for the drone age. And NATO countries or other militaries actually do not have this luxury, and if they would be engaged in a direct armed confrontation with an adversary armed with advanced weapon systems, the outcome would not be pretty.
We talked about this before we started filming here. No one talks about how effectively the Ukrainian pilots were in Syria. They smashed Assad's regime. They knocked out tons of his armor. They were instrumental in helping run that government out of Syria, and that is to your point, right? Assad had the newest and greatest armored vehicles, and they got smashed in what, like a week?
yeah. This is like if you make a historical analogy, if you have like cavalry divisions against large tank armor formations. So the outcome of the battle will be decided in a quick and decisive manner.
So I'm going to make you king for a day. Okay. What do you tell people who are building modern militaries? I mean, again, we were talking about how the Germans just ordered another $20-30 billion of tanks, right? Manned tanks. You're king for a day. What are you telling Pete Hegseth, for instance? How should he be thinking of the future of warfare?
Yeah, so essentially that the transition from manned to unmanned warfare has already begun, and we want. I say Ukrainians and Canadians, because I'm Ukrainian Canadian. Yeah, I want the United States to be in a strong position in drone warfare because it protects the free world. It has the resources to scale up, and so I think that what the United States military needs to do is to pursue a program of dronification. That is the spread of the drones to the Army, to the Air Force, and to the Navy. And I think to drive, and here you need to be ready to fight a war today, a drone war. And so this dronification would both have to be bottom up and top down. So from the bottom up perspective, you would need to give some leeway for local commanders like brigades and divisions to experiment with drone technology and to have the same level of access to the drone marketplace as in Ukraine with the Brave One marketplace, which is essentially a military version of Amazon, where brigades can procure drones directly and send the feedback loop from the front line to the manufacturer. And so this feedback loop drives down prices and increases innovation. And so these brigades need to be allowed to experiment with the drone technology. And another thing, I think that the top-down innovation would require a creation of unmanned systems forces as a separate branch of American military, which will force the Army, Navy, and create the organizational structures and procedures that the United States can fully embrace the drone revolution. And it's not just giving out small quadcopters; it's creating large. And another thing that this unmanned systems forces could do is create large unmanned systems formations, which would have operationally integrated drone systems. So you could have 1,000 drone operators concentrated at the center of gravity of the enemy to create a breakthrough and create a drone-centered maneuver operations. And I convinced Minister Fedorov to go to Zelensky in early 2024, and I wrote a paper that made its way to Zelensky, to Syrsky, to Zaluzhny, to create these unmanned systems forces. And I had a personal discussion with the minister about this matter. And this is how it all got started. And then the Russians mimicked us in about 10 months. 10 months. And they announced the creation of their unmanned systems forces on my birthday, 16th of December. So if the Russian colonels at the general staff are watching, thank you for recognizing my contribution to this. And but I think that Ukraine could have done much better. So some mistakes were made because I asked them to create large drone formations for operational style warfare, or at least of brigade size, into early 2024. And unfortunately, this scaling up, they said, okay, we don't need brigades. We are fine with UAS companies within each brigade. And they said, okay, let's create battalions, UAV battalions. Then in half a year, okay, you were right after all, let's create large formations of brigade size in order to create a drone kill zone and a continuous line, and also integrate EW with the drone forces so they don't jam each other. And so with a 1 year lag, the Ukrainians got there, but if we implemented the ideas that I put forward in early 2024 at the time, I think we would have had much greater success, because the Kursk operation was also partially based on the concentration of drone forces. But it was maybe 10% of the Ukrainian drone forces, and I advocated at least 50% to be used. And I also had this conversation with Fedorov. They initially wanted attack in the south against the Surovikin line to sever the land corridor. And I managed to convince Fedorov, and who then talked to the top military commanders, that you need to make an attack against the Russians where they least expect it. He said, oh, there are no objectives in the north. I said, there are objectives in the south, but you're going to get a breakthrough. So at this level, you need to understand that the scope within which you can achieve a success. So the idea was to make a penetration, go straight maybe 20 kilometers, and then envelop a large force of the Russians from the rear. But then they started, the general staff started playing with this plan, and I can't disclose the exact details, but some mistakes were also made in the Kursk. But the main mistake was that the Ukrainians did not create enough drone concentration against the Russians.
Interesting.
So if we have, for example, 1,000 kilometer front line, just for for an example, and you have, let's say, 1,000 drone operators, which equals to 10 drone operators per 10 kilometers. So, and if the enemy concentrate their forces at an unexpected time and place, you could mass, like in other places you put a screening force of 500 drone operators, but the other 500 drone operators are concentrated against a narrow section of the front line, let's say 10 kilometers, and so the local correlation of drone forces would be 500 to 10. Of course, it's much more complicated because there are different drone types, they have different ranges, but you get the idea. So if you make a 100 to 1 correlation of drone and EW forces, then you'll be able to quickly achieve local drone superiority. And through this drone cover will allow small mobile formations to create a penetration in enemy kill zone. And for this, I highly advocate the use of unmanned ground vehicles, so land robots. And the mission of the land robots would be to establish contact with the enemy and uncover hidden Russian positions and to find out where their drone operators are. And then and also the Russians will run out of FPVs. Let me just explain it. Because locally, if you isolate the battlefield, let's say that those 10 Russian operators have a stockpile of, let's say, 200 FPV drones. So if you send a large wave of land robots, like say 1,000 land robots attacking in waves on a 5-kilometer front line, the Russian drone operators will quickly run down on their FPV magazines. And then they will not be able to resist the small mechanized assault teams of the Ukrainians who then command the penetration, stabilize the breakthrough, and establish new drone launch sites and control centers in the enemy rear areas in order to allow maneuver drone-centered units to envelop a large body of the Russian troops. So it's no secret that a similar operation is currently undergoing in the Glypola region. So I wish lots of luck to our troops, and God bless them.
Okay, so now you're the king of the day in Ukraine. What do you think they're not doing enough of? What do they need to do better?
Well, at the tactical and operational level, there are always mistakes. I think that the largest problem with the Ukrainian military is it's also sometimes it's a source of competitive advantage, but most of the time it's detrimental. That is that the Ukrainian army is very fragmented. So you have the armed forces of Ukraine, you have the National Guard, you have border guards, you have other formations like the SBU, GUR, etc. And they are, in terms of drone warfare, they're running their own drone wars. And the idea of the unmanned systems command was to unify the effort. So you would have all drone operators and EW personnel working within the same organization. Of course, they would be assigned on a temporary or permanent assignment to the drone brigades, but they would also be able to communicate better with their peers in other brigades. So they would not, and EW needs to be integral part of the unmanned systems forces. So currently, most of EW is a separate command, and it would be better to integrate EW at the tactical, operational, strategic levels with the drone forces, and to pursue a single drone strategy. And for example, if you take the long-range precision strikes in the form of drones, you need to pursue a single strategy. So if you want to take out the Russian refineries, you better focus on that bottleneck rather than disperse your effort across different targets, however good they may be from a PR point of view. So and it's better to use the drones in a single strategy and in a single operation. For example, if you're launching an offensive, the long-range strikes, the mid strikes, all need to augment each other in order to create the advantageous outcome on the battlefield. Because ultimately the war is decided on the battlefield, and everything needs to be, to comply with that requirement.
I'm going to ask you a controversial question.
Yeah, sure.
I've talked to a ton of drone manufacturers and then also, we'll say, component providers from the West who are located in Ukraine. They think that the government spends too little money on exquisite systems. That's one of their things for me. One of the pieces of feedback they've given me. What I mean by that is, like, if you have a sub 3% success rate on something like a deep strike, right, which it might even be less than that, it might be 1%. If you spend a little bit more per platform to put some more better technology on it, you might take it from, let's call it 1% to 10%. Do you agree with that, or is that wrong?
Yeah, I'm not a big proponent of spending billions of dollars in long-range strikes, because I think that the outcome of the war in Ukraine is determined in the land domain primarily.
Okay.
So I think that most of the resources should go at the tactical level, so within the 20-kilometer kill zone.
Sure.
And a large proportion.
Let me reframe the question,
Okay.
if you don't mind. If you're spending $100,000 on a deep strike system, but for $120,000, you can increase the effectiveness 10%. Is that something you're seeing across the drone forces in Ukraine, or is that maybe a company trying to bias themselves to sell more product?
The procurement of the drones, unfortunately, is skewed towards the larger systems. I think it's just a legacy of how it developed in the West, and how generals who are responsible at the Ministry of Defense in Ukraine, or the general staff, view things. There was a Minister of Defense called Reznikov, and he said that the Mavic 3, which is the main drone, the working horse of this war, he said it ridiculed it as a wedding drone not fit for military action.
Right.
And so they still have this residual kind of bias towards smaller systems. So they traditionally prefer larger drones because they look good, like similar to tanks, etc. But you need to look at what really works. Of course, you need to have all of them, and they need to work in concert. But the cheaper system, like I said, discardability is one of the primary characteristics of the modern drone that makes it unique. And so price really matters. So if, like Stalin used to say that a quantity has a quality of its own, so the same applies to drones. So if you send a large fleet of drones, but they are cheap and can be easily produced. Because if you look, for example, at the Patriot interceptors, they're first class. They can destroy the drone, but they're very expensive, and they can be produced, I don't know, like 600, 700 per year. And you can't really scale up that production too much.
Yeah.
But in terms of drones, okay, the Iranians can send, I don't know, or the adversary can send 1,000 drones. Okay, 10,000 doesn't work. Let's make it 100,000. Let's make it 1 million drones. How do you defend against that? So scale really matters. And that's why economy of force and economy of production really matters.
Yeah.
And I think that how Ukraine can really help integrate into the U.S. military system is to be the factory for the drones, because the production costs in America are relatively high.
Yep.
So a drone that costs in China $1,000 to manufacture would cost like $10,000 in the United States to manufacture. But in Ukraine, maybe it costs like $1,300.
Yep.
So the prices would be similar to China. And in a large war of discardable unmanned systems, price really matters. And so Ukraine can team up with the United States and with other NATO countries in order to develop a shared ecosystem. And we don't have to reinvent it and to make it from scratch. The Brave One marketplace that I already referred to before is really a well-working system. So I would recommend, if I could, to the United States military to integrate their bottom-up dronification into allow their brigades and divisions to buy from the Ukrainian Brave One marketplace and see what the Ukrainian brigades are buying and experiment with the drone technology, because this technology has not matured yet. We don't know in the long term what the exact configuration will be.
Yeah.
But we need to experiment. We need to do something now.
Okay. So I think that's a nice transition to like the conflict that's currently happening in the Middle East, right? What is it showing you? What are you seeing here that's interesting, and how can we relate it back to the lessons learned in Ukraine?
When the Iranians starting dispatching their Shaheds against the Gulf countries, the West really woke up to the drones. But it must be mentioned that the Shaheds are only the tip of the iceberg. So the drone warfare has been revolutionized in the near surface domain, on the land domain in the form of land robots, and in the marine domain. And we haven't seen those capabilities deployed by the Iranians. And I have some doubts if the Russians have shared their latest technology with the Iranians, which is good, because they haven't been able to use that against the United States. But the United States might be prepared to fight an adversary and armed with the latest drone technologies, and that could be China, because I think that Russia is sharing more technology with China than with Iran. And they have a much closer cooperation there. So you need to be prepared to fight to create a deterrent, because if Russia and China see that the West is unprepared for the drone age, they may want to take advantage of that. Like if a robber can seize a soft target, he will go after it. But if they see that the United States military is pursuing dronification, is creating large unmanned systems formations, like create a drone division. Why not? Why not? They have all sorts of drones attacking deep into 100 or more kilometers, which you can take over as the defense of your main force. And so I think that it's good that the public has woken up to the drone revolution from the Shaheeds, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. You need to embrace it wholeheartedly.
Sure. I think the Shaheeds are like the most like visual representation of the drone war today for a lot of Americans. Do you know what I mean? Because like for whatever reason, and and I'd love your take on this, there seems to be this thought that the war in Ukraine is different, right? I hear this all the time. Well, it's not like the war in Ukraine is not like what the war in the Pacific would look like, or a war with Iran. And I think now we're starting to wake up to see that, like, oh, actually Ukraine, which has been dealing with 800 Shaheeds a night for a year now, right? Like the Iranians have that technology. When you hear that phrase, like the war in Ukraine is different, what's your kind of take on that?
Yeah, there's this argument that the Russians or Ukrainians are using drones because they don't have enough ammunition for artillery, or they don't have advanced air power. But I would counter that argument. Is that okay? Let's imagine a confrontation between a country that leverages its advanced air power and long-range precision strikes against an enemy armed with advanced unmanned systems forces. So locating the operators of unmanned system forces is a problem. Like the Russians can use civilian vehicles to bring up their drone operators, and can launch drones from the window of a building or from a tree line, and locating them from the air is very difficult. And they can still inflict damage on the land forces of the United States or allied countries. So essentially, if you win in the air domain, but lose the near surface and the land domain, and arguably the marine domain, you lost the war. So I think that that's very important to understand that the drone is a game changer, and you need to wake up to it, and you need to ensure that your country has the capabilities, the drone capabilities, and not try to pretend or hide from the drone revolution, or think that maybe we'll just destroy the factories. But Russia has been trying to destroy Ukrainian drone factories for 4 years, and they have a great advantage in long-range precision strikes. So Ukraine didn't have ballistic missiles until recently, or cruise missiles, or other long-range capabilities, especially in the early years of the war. And the Russians still couldn't take out the Ukrainian drone production. So believing that the United States would somehow destroy Chinese or Russian drone production completely is a wrong-footed one. But the drones that they will produce, they will overwhelm the NATO countries in the Baltic states or in other theaters.
So, Illya, is the answer just investing in counter UAS, but then also like a massive, overwhelming retaliatory strike force, like as the hedge? Is that what you think? I mean,
yes, if you just pursue the strategy of, okay, let's find some magical weapon against the drone, some counter UAS, and then we'll stick to our doctrines that have been using more or less for the past couple of decades. That's a real problem, because currently the drone is more effective than the counter drone.
Interesting.
Yeah, so let's take the technology of lasers or other high energy power. You can't really deploy them in scale, and you can provide the amount of power to the front lines, and the drones or artillery will destroy those power supplies, and those and this is not to tell that they cannot be produced in large enough numbers.
Sure.
So even if some lasers can be installed on board of ships or other important targets, deploying them in mass on the battlefield in a peer-to-peer conflict, it's not really a powerful counter-drone. Well, dispersion helps and concealment helps. This is important. And so infantry there are certain things that the U.S. military and NATO countries need to start doing now. For example, the infantry, they can already start working in a dispersed and concealed fashion. The medical evacuation guys need to understand that medical evacuation changes. So you may not longer have this golden hour where you can easily take the wounded man out. So maybe more advanced medical training is needed. So all parts of the military need to embrace the drone revolution, and that's why unmanned systems forces could coordinate that effort. And so, answering your question, the modern militaries need to have both drone forces and counter-drone, because you need to fight fire with fire. So in order to find the hidden drone operators, you need to have really close ISR capabilities. So a drone can really get close to the enemy drone operator and then identify and attack this target. So you would need to have a strong drone force to counter the enemy drone force, like in Ukraine. So you have a kill zone from the Russian side or from the Ukrainian side, and so the drone is very powerful weapon, and you need to have both counter drone, and it should be integrated.
Where do you think the next year of this conflict goes when it comes to unmanned systems? What are you seeing?
There's a trend towards automation and swarm technology. So what do people mean when they say, okay, AI or drone swarms? Essentially, it's a group of drones that are launched automatically, or drone pilot says, okay, let's engage, and they communicate between each other. So they can, if they see that one drone is shut down, they change the angle of approach, or otherwise communicate with each other automatically using AI technology. And it consists of several parts. So you would have an autopilot for the drone. That is already autopilot that can guide the drone in a no GPS environment, optically and through other sensors. There's lock-on target technology. It has matured in Ukraine, where the last, like 1 kilometer or 500 kilometer, you can engage the drone is automatically programmed with the help of AI to engage
terminal
the
guidance.
target. This is also a part of the swarm technology. So you don't wake up overnight and say, oh, hey, we have a swarm technology available. It's just an addition of technological advances that allow a fully autonomous drone swarm to engage an enemy target. And we are moving in that direction. How fast we will move will depend on manufacturers, but we are getting there. I think it's one of the trends that we're gonna see. And another trend that I've been advocating for the past 2 years is because on the tactical level, the drone is very good, but on the operational level, the generals have not yet learned the way to deploy them in the greatest fashion. So, of course, maneuver warfare disappeared, but does it mean that it has disappeared forever? I don't think so. You can still make a large concentration of force through concentrating drones. Because their logistical footprint is small, it's difficult to see where the enemy has massed them, and a large proportion of the drones can be operated with the help of AI and satellite networks or mesh networks. Like a Starlink terminal and there are other ways. So drones have to be drone operators don't have to be clustered in a 30-kilometer zone. Many of them can be working from a cafe in Kiev, for example. But the thing is that concentration of force and innovative operational concepts is the future, where you can do more with less. So even if, like using my analogy with 500 drones, like concentrating 50% of your drone forces on a narrow section of the front in order to create a breakthrough and then pursue maneuver warfare, but it will be drone-centered maneuver warfare. So you'll have mobile teams of drone operators who will establish mobile sites in captured enemy positions and in other places, and they will create a drone kill zone in the enemy rear areas, and will thus capture the high ground, and will kind of envelop the enemy first with the drones, and then the infantry can move up, the land robots can move up. So it will be interesting to watch how this whole situation develops. I've been an active advocate, and I've been one of the persons who are building this, who were building this in Ukraine, and a lot of the insights that I'm sharing here, what can be said, of course, is in my book, Rise of the Machines, and I will hopefully put a link.
Yeah, we'll put
where you can get
a bunch
the
of
book.
links in
Yeah,
there
because
for sure.
and so I think the next year will be really interesting how the war develops, and also we will be watching the spread of the war, because there's clearly a coalition of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and some maybe other rogue states.
Yep.
And it really feels emboldened, but the fact that it has so advanced unmanned systems forces in Russia's case, but the West has Ukraine in its corner. So if Ukraine shares its dossier learned, so one of the reasons, the main reason why I wrote the book is it's targeted to a Western audience. I wrote it in English, not Ukrainian. So I want the West to understand that drone warfare is serious and to pursue the reforms right now. So I'm going from one conference to another, meeting heads of armies and other generals, and trying to convince them that you need to take drones seriously, and providing them a roadmap of how that can be done. You just work with Ukraine. Ukraine is a friend and ally of the United States, and it's just natural that we need to get together and to move forward together. Because if Russia feels that the NATO has a soft underbelly in the Baltics, it will attack there.
Sure.
If China feels that the West has a soft underbelly in Taiwan, it will send a large drone fleet, mosquito fleet, to make a blockade of the island, or can send, for example, there's also an interesting process where there's a convergence of the drone of the domains. For what I'm trying to say is that there can be a marine drone that acts as a platform for aerial drones that will attack targets on land.
Yeah.
So which domain is that?
Yeah.
So and so unmanned systems are really changing warfare in fundamental ways, and so the whole doctrine, the procurement systems, their organizational structures, and the way this is force sustainment, they all need to change to reflect the
your argument
realities.
here is that basically it has already changed, and if you're not going to catch up, like, you will be left behind because of the abilities of like rethinking like what is truly now multi-domain warfare.
Yeah, and the drone has really sharpened the confrontation between the democratic countries and the authoritarian countries.
Yeah.
So especially if those countries feel emboldened that they
Sure.
can now achieve their political aims by military means,
Yep.
they may, without repercussions, they may do that. So this kind of convergence of the drone revolution and geopolitical strife.
Yeah.
We are in for a bumpy ride.
My concern is, like, we've seen the playbook now in Syria. You had dozens of Ukrainians work with who's the guy who's now running the country to overthrow Assad. That's not going to be limited to there. You can already see like the junta forces in Burma now using drones. You're seeing the drone proliferation happen across Africa. The Mexican cartels have mass adopted drones and counter UAS, and they have the money, right, to go like learn from the best. So the genie's kind of out of the bottle. If we don't start thinking differently, like it'll we have a chance to lose our way of life, or kind of domination of the world, I think is the fair way to say it. And then you're if you lose control, then it's like, well, who's going to run it? And it's like, do you want to live in that society? And I think universally we would say we would not want to live in Russia or China, where they'll turn your internet off and throw you in jail if you say the wrong thing, right?
So I just want to live in a concentration camp.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so last question. All right. You're an author. What are you reading or listening to or consuming from a media standpoint right now? What's interesting to you?
Actually, I've just rediscovered. I've read his books before, but I rediscovered Little Heart and his book Strategy. And so his indirect approach, I think, applies equally to modern warfare. So in order to dislodge the enemy psychologically as well as physically, you have to pursue a path that the enemy least expects you to pursue.
Right.
So if you want to be on the defensive, you can like if you want to attack the enemy, just pretend that you're on the defensive, etc. So you need to find a way to outsmart the enemy, to outmaneuver him, to be smart. And I think this is a classic book that I'm reading right now, and I recommend everybody to a little hard. And he has several books, so he's really, I think, he's highly recommended.
Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, it was a great pleasure being here, and I must admit that you're one of the few people in positions to influence American military decision-making who understands drones. And it's natural. For example, Field Marshal von Hindenburg, when he visited a military exercising involving tanks, he said to General Guderian, I don't understand this. In war, simple things work. Your tanks will not work. And we know what happened. And not just because Hindenburg was stupid. No, he was a pretty good commander from a military point of view.
Which is from a different age.
Yeah, it's a different age. And so modern generals, they are smart people, but they need to understand that during transitions of technological change, you need to embrace the next military thing, the transformation in the character of war. And so if the military, so you have two options. You either adapt or you're destroyed. I like to put it bluntly.
Yeah. Thanks for coming today.
Yeah,
it was
my pleasure.
a great and very fascinating conversation, and I look forward to reading your book.
My pleasure, yeah.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Drone Wars podcast. If you liked what you heard today, please subscribe to catch all the latest insights for all things defense and geopolitics.